This is the story of the 5 daughters of Zelophehad, 5 brave women who lived in a time when the laws of the land were not made for them. But instead of shrinking back, they stepped forward. Instead of accepting silence, they chose to speak. And because of their boldness, history was rewritten. Through their courage, we learn that when your heart is right and your cause is just, God can use your voice to bring lasting change. The tent was empty now. Not just cleared out, but quiet, in a way that made the air heavy. Tirzah stood at the edge of the fabric doorway, her small fingers brushing the wooden pole that held up the tent flap. It had once been their father's tent, Zelophehad's. His walking staff still leaned in the corner, untouched since the day they buried him. The mat where he used to kneel and pray was still pressed flat. And on the center wall, his family tally, a painted cloth showing the names of his daughters, remained unrolled. But everyone knew what was missing. There was no son listed beneath his name. And that meant one thing: no land, no inheritance, no future. "I heard the leaders are finalizing the divisions today," said Hoglah, stepping into the tent behind her. "The scrolls are already being marked." "They're skipping over our name," Noah added, her voice flat, "as if we never existed." Tirzah turned slowly. "But they know we're here." "They know," Mahlah said, entering last. Her face was calm, but her eyes burned like coals. "They just don't believe daughters count." Milcah knelt by the corner and touched the painted cloth. "They said land goes to the sons, and if there are no sons, it's given to another family," Noah finished. "To men." The wind shifted the tent flap. For a moment, the room felt too quiet again. Then Mahlah stood tall and said, "Then we speak." "To who?" Hoglah asked, unsure. "The leaders?" "No," Mahlah said. "Higher." "You mean Moses?" "And Eleazar," Milcah added, "and the entire assembly." Tirzah's breath caught. "We can't just walk into the tabernacle." "Why not?" Mahlah challenged. "Our father wasn't a rebel. He wasn't part of Korah's uprising. He died in the wilderness, like many others. But he followed the Lord. He loved the Lord. Why should his name disappear just because God gave him daughters instead of sons?" The other sisters glanced at each other. Mahlah kept going. "If no one speaks for us, then we speak for ourselves. If the law has never been tested, then we test it. And if history says daughters don't inherit," she paused, "then we change history." Outside, horns blew to signal the morning gathering. Tents shifted, people stirred, but inside this one tent, this quiet, sacred tent, 5 voices stood ready to be heard. Because when the world wrote them off, they decided to write something new. Would you like to continue with part 2 of 14, where the sisters leave their family tent and step into the assembly with thousands watching, and not everyone wants to hear what they have to say? This is the story of the 5 daughters of Zelophehad: Mahlah, Noah, Hoglah, Milcah, and Tirzah, 5 brave women who lived in a time when the laws of the land were not made for them. But instead of shrinking back, they stepped forward. Instead of accepting silence, they chose to speak. And because of their boldness, history was rewritten. Through their courage, we learn that when your heart is right and your cause is just, God can use your voice to bring lasting change. The tent was empty now, not just cleared out, but quiet, in a way that made the air heavy. Tirzah stood at the edge of the fabric doorway, her small fingers brushing the wooden pole that held up the tent flap. It had once been their father's tent, Zelophehad's. His walking staff still leaned in the corner, untouched since the day they buried him. The mat where he used to kneel and pray was still pressed flat, and on the center wall, his family tally, a painted cloth showing the names of his daughters, remained unrolled. But everyone knew what was missing. There was no son listed beneath his name. And that meant one thing: no land, no inheritance, no future. "I heard the leaders are finalizing the divisions today," said Hoglah, stepping into the tent behind her. "The scrolls are already being marked." "They're skipping over our name," Noah added, her voice flat, as if we never existed. Tirzah turned slowly. "But they know we're here." "They know," Mahlah said, entering last. Her face was calm, but her eyes burned like coals. "They just don't believe daughters count." Milcah knelt by the corner and touched the painted cloth. "They said land goes to the sons, and if there are no sons, it's given to another family," Noah finished, "to men." The wind shifted the tent flap. For a moment the room felt too quiet again. Then Mahlah stood tall and said, "Then we speak." "To who?" Hoglah asked, unsure. "The leaders?" "No," Mahlah said. "Higher." "You mean Moses?" "And Eleazar," Milcah added, "and the entire assembly." Tirzah's breath caught. "We can't just walk into the tabernacle." "Why not?" Mahlah challenged. "Our father wasn't a rebel. He wasn't part of Korah's uprising. He died in the wilderness, like many others. But he followed the Lord. He loved the Lord. Why should his name disappear just because God gave him daughters instead of sons?" The other sisters glanced at each other. Mahlah kept going. "If no one speaks for us, then we speak for ourselves. If the law has never been tested, then we test it. And if history says daughters don't inherit," she paused, "then we change history." Outside, horns blew to signal the morning gathering. Tents shifted, people stirred, but inside this one tent, this quiet, sacred tent, 5 voices stood ready to be heard, because when the world wrote them off, they decided to write something new. Would you like to continue with part 2 of 14, where the sisters leave their family tent and step into the assembly with thousands watching, and not everyone wants to hear what they have to say? They sat in the shadow of the olive trees just beyond the camp center, far enough to be out of sight, but close enough to hear if something happened. The sisters didn't speak at first, not because they were afraid, but because they were thinking, waiting, wondering. "What if he comes back with silence?" Tirzah asked finally, staring at the dry leaves fluttering in the dirt. "What if God says nothing?" "Then we try again," Mahlah said. "Truth doesn't vanish just because people don't want to hear it." "But what if he does speak?" Noah said softly. "And what if it's no?" They looked at each other. Even Mahlah didn't answer. Nearby, a group of women passed by, glancing curiously before lowering their eyes. "That's them," one whispered. "The bold ones." "No," said another. "The foolish ones." Milcah sat up straighter. "Are we really foolish for asking to belong?" Hoglah snorted. "Only if asking for justice is foolish." A boy ran past with a goat, then stopped and turned. "My father said you're trying to get men's land. He said it's dangerous." Tirzah smiled gently. "Tell your father we're not after what's his. We're after what's ours." The boy blinked, nodded like he wasn't sure what that meant, and ran off. The sun climbed higher. And still, no word, no call, no answer. Until dash. A horn blew. Not a warning, a summons. The signal for a new command. The sisters stood in unison. Something had happened. They moved carefully toward the main gathering space where the assembly had started to form again. Moses was already there. So was Eleazar, and this time they weren't just waiting. They were holding the scroll. Moses raised his hand to quiet the people, and in a voice that echoed across the camp, he said, "The Lord has spoken." The crowd leaned in. Mahlah's hands clenched at her sides. Tirzah closed her eyes. Noah held her breath. And then Moses said, "The daughters of Zelophehad are right." Gasps, whispers, shock. Moses continued, "You must certainly give them property as an inheritance among their father's relatives and give their father's inheritance to them." And then he said something no one expected, a new law. This is now a legal statute for Israel. If a man dies and has no son, give his inheritance to his daughter. Tears sprang to Hoglah's eyes. Milcah let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Tirzah turned to her sisters, overwhelmed. Noah laughed, a stunned, joyful sound, and Mahlah. She simply closed her eyes, lifted her face to the sky, and whispered, "Thank you." But even as joy bubbled in their hearts, not everyone clapped. Some men murmured, some women stared in disbelief, and somewhere, among the tribes, a quiet anger began to form. Because not everyone wanted change, even when it was just. And the sisters had just done more than speak up. They had rewritten law. The scroll had been signed, the law was changed. And for a brief moment, the daughters of Zelophehad were heroes, sought after, celebrated, even smiled at by elders who once ignored them. Their names were spoken with wonder. Their story repeated at campfires like a song of triumph. But the cheers didn't last long. It began with a summons, a quiet one, a message delivered not by Moses or Eleazar, but by Kishon, the representative of the tribe of Manasseh, their own tribe. He met them at the edge of their family land, arms crossed, eyes hard. "You've stirred something dangerous," he said flatly. Hoglah narrowed her eyes. "We stood for what was right." "You've cracked the order," he replied, "and it won't stop with you." Noah stepped forward. "Are you threatening us?" "I'm warning you," he said. "There are men in this tribe, respected men, who now fear losing land. They say if you marry outside the tribe, your inheritance will pass to other clans. You think that won't cause division?" Milcah frowned. "So we shouldn't marry at all." "You should marry wisely," Kishon said, his voice heavy with implication. "And remember where your loyalty lies." He walked off, leaving silence behind him. That evening the sisters sat near the edge of their newly granted land, a rocky hill shaded by palm trees overlooking the slow-moving river. "It's not enough," Milcah muttered. "We changed the law, and they're still trying to change us." "They want to trap us," Noah said. "If we marry outside the tribe, we lose the land. If we refuse marriage, we're disobedient. Either way, we lose." Tirzah picked up a stone and tossed it. "Why do we always have to prove ourselves?" "We don't," Mahlah said. "We just have to stand again." That night, word spread. A new discussion was being brought before Moses, not to remove the law, but to limit it. A proposal. Women who inherit land must marry within their own tribe. Some called it protection. Others called it a cage. The next morning, before the sun had even warmed the tents, the sisters were walking again. Back toward the tabernacle, back toward the leaders, again. This time there were no horns, no crowds, just 5 women standing once more beneath banners that had fluttered over their heads since childhood. And this time, Moses looked tired, but not annoyed, almost expectant. He listened as they spoke, listened as they explained how the backlash had come, how warnings had been whispered, how pressure had already begun. He listened, then nodded. "You were right before," he said, "and now, you're wise again." Then he looked to Eleazar, to the elders, and back to the sisters. And once again, a new command was made. They may marry whomever they please, but only within their tribes, so the land will not pass away from Manasseh. It wasn't a defeat, but it wasn't freedom either. And yet, it was progress and history. Once again, because they stood, something new was written, and they were still not finished. The land was dry, dusty, uneven, scattered with stones that hadn't been touched in years. But to Mahlah, it was the most beautiful thing she'd ever seen. This was their portion, granted by God, written into law, protected by decree. And now, it was theirs to walk, measure, and keep. Tirzah ran her fingers along the edge of a fig tree. It doesn't look like much yet. Milcah knelt near a bend in the earth where grass had started to grow, but it will. We'll plant, building water. Wait. Hoglah shielded her eyes and squinted into the distance. Is that smoke? Noah followed her gaze. A thin stream of gray rose from just beyond the trees. Someone's already camped nearby. They hurried toward it, moving through brush and over uneven ground until they reached the ridge. At the base of the hill, a group of men had set up a small camp. The banners of Manasseh were tied to nearby poles, fluttering in the wind, and standing among them was Kishon. Mahlah exhaled. He's back. They watched for a moment as Kishon directed younger men to unload tools, rope, and wood. He's setting boundaries, Hoglah muttered. For his land? Tirzah asked. Noah shook her head. Number. For ours. They marched down the hill together. Kishon turned, pretending to be surprised. Sisters, he said smoothly. I thought you'd be here later. We're here now, Mahlah said, and we see your camp. Kishon gestured to the wood. We're only assisting with survey lines. You wouldn't want to mark the land incorrectly. Milcah folded her arms. We can measure our own borders. Tirzah stepped forward. You're trying to shrink them. He smirked. If you're not careful, inheritance has a way of drifting. Mahlah looked him square in the eye. Not this one. We didn't come this far to let anyone move the lines. That night, the sisters gathered stones, big ones. They walked the full edge of their land by starlight, placing markers where the scroll had described, each stone a reminder that they knew what was theirs. No more warnings, Hoglah said. No more shrinking, said Milcah. No more pretending to be small, said Noah. Mahlah smiled and added the last stone to the pile. And no more letting others decide what we get to keep. The next morning, Kishon returned. He found the stones. He said nothing. He left. And the sisters began to build not just a home, but a future. A space that had never belonged to daughters before. now full of laughter, stories, and new seeds in the soil. But peace never lasted long in the wilderness, and the next challenge wouldn't come from outside. It would come from within. The house was only half finished. Rough beams held up the frame. A woven roof covered part of the cooking space. There were no walls yet, only stakes in the ground where rooms would one day be. But even without walls, the voices still carried. "I heard they'll be offered to the sons of Mashir," said a woman passing with a water jar. "Cousins," her friend whispered. "That'll keep the land in the family." Mahlah was nearby, spreading new grain in the sun. She didn't flinch, but she heard every word. That night the sisters sat around the fire beneath the open sky. Hoglah stirred lentils in the pot. The matchmakers are circling. "They call it honorable," Milcah said. "But it's just control dressed up in ceremony." Tirzah frowned. "Are we not supposed to marry?" "We're allowed," Noah said, "but only within our tribe. They think that means we'll say yes to anyone from Manasseh." "They want us to keep the land," Mahlah added, "but give up the choice." 2 days later, the first messenger arrived. A polite knock, a scroll in his hand, an invitation from the son of a wealthy elder, strong, smart, and already owning land near the western hills. "He offers to share his home," the messenger said, "and promises to honor your father's name." Mahlah looked at her sisters, and then calmly handed the scroll back. "Tell him," she said, "we don't need to be shared or honored like possessions. If he wants to build something, he can start with a conversation." The messenger left in stunned silence. Then came 2 more offers, then 4. Some were sweet, some were smug. Some came with gifts, cloth, oil, rare dates, but every one of them felt the same, like a transaction. One evening, Noah stood at the edge of the property, arms crossed as she watched the sky darken. Milcah joined her. "I don't mind the idea of marriage," Noah said quietly, "but I do mind being chosen for my land, not my heart." Milcah nodded. "I want someone who sees me, not my boundary stones." Behind them, Tirzah whispered to herself, reciting a line their father used to say, "An inheritance given is not just soil, it's legacy, it's responsibility, it's voice." That night, Mahlah gathered them all. She unrolled the scroll of the law, the very one changed because of them. She pointed to the line etched into history, "They may marry anyone they please, as long as it is within their tribe." She looked at each sister. "This doesn't mean we're trapped. It means we're trusted. We can choose, and we will." But not everyone agreed, because somewhere else, a different scroll was being written, a secret one, with names of men who believed the daughters of Zelophehad should be married off, before they got too used to having a voice. It began with laughter. "Tirzah's!" She came running into the courtyard with dust on her robe and flowers in her hands. "Someone left these on the boundary stone." She grinned, holding out a bundle of wild hyacinths and desert poppies. "And look, there's a note." Milcah raised a brow. "Another suitor." "This one signed it," Tirzah said, her cheeks flushed. "To the most courageous woman in all of Manasseh. May your roots be as deep as your faith." Noah took the note. "I'll admit, that's better than 'join my house and I'll double your herd.'" Hoglah smiled. "Still smells like flattery." But Mahlah went quiet, because she recognized the signature. "Jorah," she said softly. Tirzah blinked. "You know him?" "We trained beside his father's tent when we were younger, before our father died." Mahlah lowered her voice. He's clever, friendly, and well-connected. And dangerous? Noah asked. That depends on what he wants. That evening, Jorah arrived in person. He didn't come with scrolls or messengers. He came walking and smiling and with a gentle tone. I don't believe in ambushes, he said, so I'll speak plainly. I want to marry one of you, and if I'm being honest, his eyes turned to Mahlah. I was hoping it would be you. The sisters exchanged glances. Why? Mahlah asked carefully. Because I admire strength, Jorah said. You've done what no one else dared. You changed the law. You've made history. He stepped closer. And because I want to build something that lasts, with someone who knows how to stand when the world tells her to sit. The air shifted. It sounded sincere, even felt sincere. And for the first time in weeks, Mahlah was silent until Noah stepped in. And what happens to our land? Jorah turned. It stays with you, of course. I have my own. Together, it could become something great. And your family? Milcah asked. Do they agree? Jorah hesitated. They will. That pause was all it took. Mahlah's gaze sharpened. They don't agree now. No, he admitted. But they respect strategy. They understand influence. If I marry you, it settles everything. No more suitors. No more questions. The land stays clean and the people stop whispering. That night, Mahlah didn't sleep. She walked the borders of their land again, tracing the stones with her fingers. Was it wrong to want love? Was it wrong to consider what Jorah offered? He had spoken with kindness, with logic, even admiration. But something inside her whispered, admiration is not the same as trust. By morning, everything changed. Tirzah returned from the well with a scrap of parchment found near the merchant's cart. On it, a list of names. Jorah's name was at the top. So were 3 others, men from Manasseh, and a note beside it, in a different hand. Whichever she chooses, seal the land by spring, delay if needed, but secure it. They weren't offers. They were assignments. The flowers had thorns, after all. Mahlah stood at the edge of the camp just after sunrise, scroll in hand, dust curling around her feet as the wind swept through the valley. She didn't flinch when Jorah approached. I thought you might come early, he said casually, adjusting the belt on his tunic. You seemed unsure last night. I was, Mahlah said evenly, unrolling the parchment, until I read this. Jorah's smile faltered. She held it up, his name, alongside 3 others, inked beside a note that stripped their intentions bare. I thought you admired strength, she said. I do. Then why try to manipulate it? Jorah's jaw tightened. It's not manipulation. It's protection. You 5 caused a disruption. There are elders still angry about it. I was trying to calm them, offer a solution. You weren't offering peace, Mahlah said. You were offering a trade. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. I was offering you security, respect. You could be part of something bigger. I already am, she said, stepping back. It's called truth. You should try building something on it. Then she turned and walked away. Back at their land, the sisters gathered beneath the fig tree now bearing its first green leaves. Tirzah was quiet, her hands in her lap. Milcah spoke first. What now? We could report it to Moses, bring the scroll, speak it aloud. We could, But should we? Noah asked. We've already changed the law once. If we keep pushing, they'll say we're troublemakers. We're already called that, Hoglah muttered. Mahlah sat down. We don't need another public battle. We've already won the right to choose. Let's use it. How? Asked Milcah. Let's show the camp what choosing well actually looks like. So they did. The next week, the sisters sent word through Manasseh. They would not entertain further proposals unless the men were willing to come speak to all 5 of them at once, in the open. A strange silence followed, then whispers. Then only one man came. He brought no scroll, no flowers, no promises, only himself. His name was Iran, a shepherd, not a soldier. He spoke with Noah first, asking about their harvest plan. Then to Tirzah, helping her reinforce the new roof frame. Later he sat beside Milcah and asked about her father. He listened more than he talked, and never once mentioned land. I like him, Tirzah whispered a few days later. So do I, said Hoglah, surprised. He's the first one who seems to see us as more than a solution, said Milcah. Noah raised a brow at Mahlah. Well? Mahlah smiled. Let's see if he stays. But not everyone stayed silent. Jorah returned, not to apologize, but to warn. He spoke to the elders of Manasseh behind closed tents. He spread word that the daughters were still manipulating the law, that their land was being used as bait, that they were disrespecting the boundaries given by Moses. The rumor spread fast, and this time it reached Moses. The summons came at midday. A young Levite arrived on horseback, dust in his beard, scroll in hand. By order of Moses and the elders, he read aloud, the daughters of Zelophehad are to appear before the assembly. He said nothing more, but the weight of his words was clear. I told you he wouldn't let it rest, Hoglah muttered as they gathered their things. Noah pulled her scarf tighter. They think we've done something wrong. Tirzah's voice was barely a whisper. Have we? No, Mahlah said firmly. We've done what we were told we had the right to do. We've spoken carefully, chosen wisely, and we've stood with honor. But honor doesn't silence rumors, Milcah added. Mahlah turned to them. Then we do what we've always done. We walk into that place, and we speak the truth. The courtyard was already full when they arrived. Moses sat beneath the shade of the tall meeting canopy, flanked by Eleazar and the elders. The same place they stood the first time. Only now the mood was different. Not awe, not curiosity, but suspicion. Mahlah stepped forward. We've come as summoned. One elder stood. We've received reports of unrest among the tribe of Manasseh, whispers of improper proposals, accusations of manipulation, of your land being used as leverage. By us? Noah asked, incredulous. Another elder added, Some say you are turning the inheritance into a marketplace. We've received no inheritance we didn't fight for, Milcah said, and no guest has been turned away. But we have been careful, because we honor what was given. Eleazar leaned forward. There is one man who claims you rejected him not for character, but for his clan. Jorah. Of course. Mahlah lifted her chin. We rejected him for deception, not for bloodline. Do you have proof? Moses asked gently. Yes, said Tirzah, stepping forward. She handed the parchment, the secret scroll of names, to Eleazar. Silence fell. The elders leaned in. Eyes scanned the ink. Whispers began. Then Eleazar looked up. Where did you find this? Near the merchant tents, Milcah said. Hidden, but not well enough. Moses read it last, then looked at Jorah, who stood quietly near the edge of the gathering. Do you deny this? Jorah hesitated, then bowed. I acted in fear. I feared the land would drift outside our tribe. You feared losing control, Noah said flatly. But fear, Moses added, does not justify manipulation. The scroll was handed back to Mahlah. The crowd waited. And then Moses did something unexpected. He stood. He faced the entire camp. And he said, Let it be remembered, these daughters have not only obeyed the command, they have honored it in speech, in decision, and in restraint. A breath of relief passed between the sisters. Then Moses turned to the people. May every household raise daughters like these, who do not twist law to gain power, but stand in truth to guard what is holy. That night, no rumors spread, no letters were sent, no accusations followed. Only peace and the first full stars of spring. The sisters returned to their land just as the sun dipped behind the western hills, casting golden shadows across the boundary markers they had so carefully placed. But something was wrong. Tirzah stopped first. The stone, she whispered. The marker on the eastern border, the one set beneath the fig tree, was gone. They rushed forward. Sure enough, the flat stone with their father's symbol carved into it was missing. Milcah's breath caught. Who would? Jorah, Noah said, almost spitting his name. He wouldn't dare. Mahlah knelt where the stone had been. A new track had been carved beside it, running deeper into their territory, pushing the border back nearly 10 paces. A bold line, drawn in dust. That night, none of them slept. They sat around the fire, the flames casting long shadows against the tent walls. What if it starts again? Hoglah asked. What if removing one stone is the start of taking it all? We go back to Moses, Noah said quickly. No, Mahlah said, shaking her head. Not this time. Milcah looked up. Why not? Because this isn't about the law anymore, Mahlah said. It's about us. We've already proven we can win a battle in front of the elders, but now... She looked toward the hill where the stone had been. We need to show who we are when no one's watching. At sunrise, the 5 of them walked to Jorah's camp. No torches, no scrolls, just steady footsteps and quiet hearts. He was in the courtyard sharpening a blade when they arrived. He looked up, clearly surprised. I heard you stood before the elders again, he said. Congratulations. Mahlah didn't smile. One of our boundary stones is missing. He looked away. That could have been anyone. We know it was you. Silence. Then Tirzah, softly, held out something in her hand. The missing stone. They had found it at the edge of the western path, abandoned in a pile of broken wood. She placed it at Jorah's feet. Return it, she said. Yourself. He looked up slowly. Why are you giving me the chance? Because we don't want revenge, said Milcah. We want peace, said Noah. And if you ever did admire us, Mahlah added, then prove it now. Jorah stared at the stone, then at them. His face was unreadable, but after a long, long moment, he stood and picked it up. They walked beside him as he carried it back. At the edge of their land, Jorah set it down. He stepped back. "I was wrong," he said, so quietly only they could hear. "And you were everything your father would be proud of." Then he left. No grand apology, no crowd, just one step back and 5 steps forward. Later that night, Tirzah whispered, "That was mercy, wasn't it?" "Yes," said Mahlah. "Even when it hurt?" "Especially then." The fig tree bloomed early. Its leaves, wide and green, cast shade over the central courtyard where Tirzah sat weaving new cloth for the guest tent. She hummed softly, her fingers moving in rhythm. She was the youngest, the quietest. But she noticed things, like how Noah had started rising earlier, how Milcah walked slower when the shepherd passed, and how Mahlah, strong, sharp Mahlah, lingered longer near the edge of their land, where a certain visitor sometimes came to trade wool for grain. His name was Aaron. He came without expectations, and he came with questions, not speeches. He asked about their harvest, their late father's favorite psalms, and the best route to fetch water from the northern spring. He never stayed long, but each time Mahlah watched him go with a look no one had ever seen on her before. Not fear, not certainty, but wonder. That evening, he returned. This time with no sheep, no satchel, just a clay jar of honey, a gift from his mother. He sat across from Mahlah beneath the fig tree. "I know I have no land to offer," he said quietly, "but I've watched you plant yours with courage. I know I have no scroll to change history, but I've seen you write your name into it." Mahlah looked at him, eyes unreadable. "And I know I'm not the boldest man or the most eloquent, but I believe in truth. I believe in walking beside someone, not ahead of them, and I'd be honored if that someone could be you." Silence. The wind stirred the fig leaves, and for the first time, Mahlah didn't answer with strategy or wisdom or certainty. She smiled. "I believe in truth too," she said. The next morning, they told their sisters. There were tears, some of joy, some of disbelief, and then laughter. "About time," said Milcah. "He sees you," whispered Tirzah, "not just your strength, all of you." Noah placed a hand over Mahlah's. "Will you stay here?" "Yes," said Mahlah, "but not just for me, for all of us. This land isn't a prize, it's a promise, and now it will grow with love." Word spread quickly through Manasseh, but this time there were no scrolls passed in secret, no accusations, just a quiet celebration, and neighbors who came not to measure but to bless. But just when it seemed the final chapter was being written, news came from Moses. He was preparing for his final blessing over the tribes, and he had asked specifically for the daughters of Zelophehad to attend. All 5, together. One more time. The sisters traveled at dawn, just like the first time. Only now, the path felt different. Not heavy with fear, but full of wonder. They didn't carry scrolls this time, just baskets of figs and dates and a jar of honey from their land tucked carefully between linen folds. A gift for Moses. When they arrived at the camp outside Mount Nebo, elders greeted them with knowing smiles. They were expected. "Come," one said, "Moses is waiting." Moses sat beneath a canopy of palms, the mountain rising behind him. His eyes aged but still sharp with light. "You came," he said with a warm smile. Mahlah bowed low. "You called." He motioned for them to sit. "I am preparing my blessing for the tribes," he said slowly. "My last. The Lord has shown me the land, but I will not cross into it." Tirzah's face fell. "But you've led us all this way." Moses nodded gently. "And that is enough." He looked at each of them in turn. "You stood once, trembling but brave. You challenged what was broken, not to tear down, but to restore. Because of your faith, the law itself was shaped." Milcah's voice was quiet. "We only asked for what was right." "And that," Moses said, "is exactly what history needed." He reached for a folded cloth beside him and opened it to reveal a new scroll. Fresh ink. New names. "I want your family name recorded here," he said. "Not just as a legal note, but as a story passed down." He dipped the reed and wrote slowly, "These are the daughters of Zelophehad, who stood for truth, honored the law, and inherited the land by faith." The wind stirred the canopy. No one spoke. And then Moses added one more line. "They are a sign to Israel that God hears, not only the strong but the faithful." The sisters wept, not out of grief, but because it finally felt finished. Their father's name restored, their family remembered, their future secured. That night they camped by the edge of the river, near where the people of Israel would soon cross into the Promised Land. But their legacy had already crossed over, stone by stone, stand by stand, word by word. The ground was warm when they returned. The fig tree, once bare, now stretched high and leafy, casting shade over the courtyard. Vines crept along the edges of the home, and in the center of the land, where once there had only been stones, there were rows. Long, careful rows, for planting. Noah ran her hands along the furrows. "Milcah!" she called, smiling. "You made these?" Milcah grinned from behind the olive saplings. "I had help." A group of children darted past, laughing as they chased each other between baskets of seed. Their sandals kicked up dust, but their joy left peace behind. "Whose are they?" asked Tirzah, laughing. "Some of the families from the eastern slope," Milcah said. "They asked to settle nearby, said they wanted to raise their sons and daughters near women who knew how to stand." Mahlah raised a brow. "And we said yes." "We said yes," Milcah confirmed, "because this land was never just ours to hold. It was ours to steward." Iran appeared over the ridge, a yoke over his shoulders and 2 jars swaying gently. "Water's warm, but clean," he said, nodding to Mahlah. "Want to help me pour the first?" Mahlah took a jar from him without a word and followed him to the rows. Together they tipped the jars and let the water soak the thirsty earth. It wasn't ceremony, just life, new life. That night, the sisters sat outside, sharing bread under the stars. Tirzah braided Noah's hair like she had when they were children. Hoglah sharpened the corner posts of the last unfinished fence. Milcah counted the olive buds, and Mahlah looked out over the dark fields, full of seeds. "I used to think our story would end with scrolls," she said softly, "with laws and borders and courtrooms." "And it didn't?" Noah asked. Mahlah shook her head. "It ends here, with people, with roots, with new voices." She reached for the cloth Moses had given them, now framed and hung near the doorway of their home. They stood for truth. They honored the law. They inherited the land by faith. Milcah leaned her head on her sister's shoulder. "Think people will remember us?" "They already do," Hoglah said, "but not just for what we changed." Tirzah smiled. "They'll remember how we lived." The stars above them burned brighter than ever, but the real light was in the land below, alive, growing, promised, and still full of one last chapter to write. The sun was just rising when the children gathered beneath the fig tree. They came barefoot, with braids half finished and cheeks still rosy from sleep. Some carried small baskets of figs, others held smooth stones, eager to trade or show what they'd found in the nearby stream. The youngest settled beside Tirzah, leaning into her side. "Tell us the story again," he whispered, "the one with the scroll." Milcah smiled from the doorway. "Again? You know it by heart." "No," said another girl. "Tell it the way only you tell it." Mahlah rose from her seat and stepped into the circle. She looked at the faces, some familiar, some new, all wide-eyed. "All right," she said. "But this time, you finish it." The children blinked. "You already know how it ends," one said. "No," Mahlah replied. "You know how our part ends, but not yours." She pointed to the olive tree. "When we stood before Moses, there were no women's names on the land scroll." She touched the earth with her hand. "When we asked for our inheritance, some said we were foolish." She looked to the framed scroll above the door. "But we believed God was just, and that truth didn't belong to men alone." Milcah stepped forward. "And when people tried to twist our courage into trouble, we stood again." Tirzah added softly, "Not with shouting, not with fear, but with faith." Hoglah, grinning, "And a little stubbornness." The children giggled. Then Noah spoke. "We fought for something that matters, but not just so we could have land. We stood so you would know what's possible." She turned to a girl with dust on her knees and wild curls in her hair. "If someone tells you to stay quiet when God has given you truth, what will you do?" "I'll speak," the girl whispered. "And if someone says you're not strong enough to lead, I'll lead anyway. And if you're scared, I'll ask God to help me stand." The sisters nodded. Then they sat among the children. Not above them, but beside them, because history hadn't ended. It had only widened. Like the river beyond their fields, stretching further than any of them could see. And in years to come, long after Mahlah, Noah, Hoglah, Milcah, and Tirzah had gone to rest with their ancestors, their names lived on, not just in scrolls, not just in stone, but in every daughter who stood for truth, in every child who believed they could change history, and in every voice that remembered this one simple lesson. You don't have to be famous to be faithful. You just have to be willing to stand. You don't have to be famous to be faithful. You just have to be willing to stand.